Welcome, everyone. My name is Susie Arnett, and I'm the Director of Luminary Programming here at Kripalu. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce tonight's very special conversation with Dr. Barbara Vacarr, our CEO, and Reverend Irene Monroe from WGBH in Boston. The talk tonight is about compassion, and this is a very much front of mind for us right now at Kripalu. We're in the middle of a 30-day campaign for the month of November, and where we've invited many of our faculty and presenters to share their teachings about how to live a more compassionate life. And so this value is very much in our hearts. Kripalu actually means compassion in Sanskrit, and it's one of our key organizational values. So we're very excited to have you guys here tonight and share this time with us. I want to give you a little bit of information about the evening. It's going to be very participatory and engaged. We are going to be filming, but we won't be filming any guests. We'll just be filming the conversation with Barbara and Reverend Irene. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it on to our esteemed faculty, Kripalu faculty, Michelle Dahlback, who will lead us in a centering.
Great. Thank you, Susie. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here to offer you a centering, a way to help you direct your attention inward, to connect to yourself, and to prepare yourself for this evening's event. But before we actually start to turn attention and dive inward, I'd like for you actually to take your awareness to the space, most particularly the people around you. Like, take a moment to look around you and see who's here. Like, who showed up for this event tonight? You might, offer them a hello. You might give them a wave. You might introduce yourself to them, right? Offer them a greeting, acknowledge them. Yeah. Hello, friends. Hello, neighbors. All right. So, now that you see who's here and who's around you, let's check out inside. So start to get yourself comfortable in your seat, however that looks for you, right? Shifting around, making yourself nice and comfortable. And then you may want to close your eyes. You may just want to soften your gaze down towards the earth, but start to direct your attention inside. And take a nice deep breath in through your nose. Let it out through an open mouth. Do that again for yourself. Draw a breath in through the nose and let it out through the mouth, maybe with a little sigh. One more for good measure, right? Feel yourself arriving to this space, to this moment. And take a moment to welcome yourself here, to acknowledge yourself. Welcome your body here, right? This body, this amazing vehicle of action and connection out in the world. Welcome your breath here, the life force, the great equalizer, right? The great regulator, the conduit between your body and your mind. Welcome your breath here. And acknowledge and welcome your mind to be here as well. This amazing thinking, planning, creating, problem-solving, memory-holding mind. Welcome it to be part of this experience as well. And just as important, maybe even more important, welcome your heart here. So you may just want to consider the heart, or you may actually want to lift a hand up and rest it on the heart. And consider, bring to mind the qualities of heart. What are the qualities of the heart? take a moment after naming a quality or two to bring to mind something or someone you are grateful for. Now hold yourself present, hold yourself in the center of that awareness. But in your mind's eye, bring back the people in this room. Start to include everybody in this building here at Kripalu. And then widen your awareness out. Invite and include your family, your friends, the people in your workplace, the people of your community back home. And consider that as humans, we are hardwired to live in community. And everything points to this. The teachings of spiritual traditions, the findings of anthropologists, the research of sociologists, poets write endlessly about it. We are designed to be communal beings. What is your place? What is your role in all those relationships in your life? Friends, family, work, community. What is it like to be an individual being with all your own thoughts and feelings and emotions as you navigate your way in the world amongst other individual beings with their thoughts, feelings, emotions, opinions, and agendas? In all of that, how do you stay connected? How do you stay centered? How do you find inner support and cultivate inner strength? Again, we're hardwired to live and flourish in community, but also know that we are hardwired to protect ourselves from everything that is unfamiliar, to anything that threatens us, to all sorts of dangers. So the big question is, how do we balance the two, connecting and protecting? How do we balance them with grace and skill? What do you do when you encounter, when you rub up against different perspectives and values? And how can we as a society use compassion to make connections and to guide our actions out in the world? As we come together this evening and contemplate our relationship to embrace, practice, and live compassion, consider these words from the author Laura Jack. Together, we are going to create a world with more love, more understanding, and more compassion when we see beyond the surface and get to know people for their stories, for their unique experiences, and for their distinct gifts. Hate becomes impossible, and love becomes inevitable. Let's take another deep breath in together and let it out. Bowing and acknowledging that divine essence, that divine quality that you have within you. And then when you're ready, allow your eyes to open and once again connect to this community around you, all of these divine beings. Yes.
Thank you. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. That was so beautiful. What a treat. So now I get to tell you what you're going to do with these note cards that are on your seat and the pens. And what we'd love for you to do is just take a moment and think about what brought you to this talk tonight, or what question sits inside of you. And so we'll take a few minutes and write those down. So if you could finish that up and then pass the cards to this person in the center, we'll collect them. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Barbara Vacarr and Reverend Irene Monroe.
Thank you. Michelle, thank you. That was just beautiful, and it was a beautiful way to situate ourselves in the topic of this evening, which is really about how do we really locate ourselves in ourselves and be in community and have a bridge of compassion that links those two. So thank you, and Susie, thank you for the opening. Welcome. It is so wonderful to be in this space, in this community. I'm just curious, how many here are here for the first time at Kripalu? Raise your hand. Oh, welcome. And I hope it's the first of many more. And for those of you who are returning, welcome home, and hope it is something that you continue to do. So I'm Barbara Vacarr, and I have the tremendous privilege of being the CEO of this amazing place, Kripalu, at a time where Kripalu's mission of empowering individuals and communities to reach their full potential through the wisdom and practice of yoga is so needed in our world. And as I think about that and how needed it is, I feel tremendous gratitude being in community, in this space, in this moment, in this week where we have just lived through a national midterm election that amidst tremendously painful divisiveness and polarization in our country and in our world. And to be here in this kind of a conversation about compassion, I actually feel happy that we are pushing at the edges of the yoga space. I believe deeply that as yoga offers us a way of being and acting in the world, we must now use retreat to our practice on the yoga mat as a way of serving actively and compassionately in the world. We know that embodied mindfulness teaches us the skills, the practice of connecting more deeply inside of ourselves as the conduit, the prerequisite for being able to reach out to others in a compassionate way. And it is in connecting with ourselves inside that we have the capacity to see ourselves in the story of the other, something that is incredibly important right now. And so that is an intention of this evening, to really explore that space. And I want to just tell you a little bit about myself. My learning, my living, and my livelihood feel intimately connected and emerge out of what I think of as an inherited mandate as the daughter of a German Jewish survivor of the Holocaust to repair the world. And it is that mandate that brought me to my work, and I ended up in a career in higher education, as I really believe that learning and education is development. And there I was a faculty member, an administrator, a college president. And here I am at Kripalu, this amazing place, and deeply feel that I left higher education to come to the place of higher learning. And that is truly what I have encountered here. And to all of that, you agree. Yes. And to all of that, I bring a background of studies in a branch of psychology known as transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology is a branch of the study of psychology that seeks to expand our conception of human potential and reaches out to the wisdom traditions to explore human experience that has the capacity to transcend space and time, to transcend our personal distinct identities, to transcend the boundaries of the material physical world. And in that way, I feel like I've come full circle to Kripalu, where yoga is actually a practice that helps us to cultivate and develop transpersonal perception so that we might actually experience that unitive experience, that experience of where we are deeply connected with one another. Yoga is an embodied practice that connects us deeply to what lives inside, to what lives in our bodies, the stories that live inside of us, the lived experience that becomes our storied existence. And it is from that place that there is a potential to touch another, to see ourselves in the other. And that's exactly what happened recently in a conversation that I had with Reverend Irene on the phone. And it's very recent. We didn't know each other. And we met via an introduction through a mutual friend colleague. And we got on the phone. And, you know, as people do when they're sort of checking each other out, we sort of danced around and began the conversation about how we thought and felt about what was happening in the world right now. And as we talked about that, and I felt that I could communicate with this person on the other end of the call, I found myself moving into the feelings, the despair I have about what's happening in the world that's very connected to my story that I carry around. And as I did that, I think the same was happening on the other end of the phone, and we started to share our feelings about what was happening in the world. And from that place, we started to share our stories with each other, stories that take a while to open up in human connection, but we started to share them with each other. And in our stories, we found many connections. One of the more superficial ones, but one that I really get a kick out of is we discovered that we were both girls from Brooklyn, and what we like to do is have conversation and create community. And we started to talk about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could expand the kind of conversation that we were having on the phone about what was happening in the world, about our lived experience of it, and our deep desire to create a compassionate community. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could create the space to do that? And so here we are. This is that space. And so what I'd love to do is to invite us into this space, into the evening's conversation, in a way that Martin Buber describes as from a position of I and thou, really speaking from that sacred space of I to that holding the other in that sacred space of thou. And on that note, welcome. I look forward to it, and take it away, Irene.
Good evening. I'm quite delighted to return back here. I did a workshop many years ago, I guess, before you were here, and it's always a delight. I was sharing with Barbara's staff that I was going to do this hike this morning, but being from the city, it's so quiet, I overslept. It's just a joy here. So I want to just introduce a little bit about myself here, and my other story, I'll go further into it. But who I am, I always tell people, is a fluid concept. If you reside in Greater Boston, I hope that you listen to Jim and Marjorie's show, and that on Mondays you hear me flapping on the segment called All Revved Up. And I'm hoping that if you reside in Greater Boston, you read some of my articles either in Bay Windows, which is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender paper, or Cambridge Chronicle, or the opinion pages in the Boston Globe here. But what I've come to share with you, I've not shared with many, but is to tell you how I got to really understand compassion, and that I am really the product of people, of strangers seen and unseen. I'm also lucky to be here with you this evening, and so let me start with the lucky part. The lucky part is this. Many years ago, and I'm not going to tell you how many decades ago, I was abandoned in a trash can in Fort Greene Park. And what was a lucky part of that moment was that the garbage men happened that day to be cleaning that side of Fort Greene Park. But the other lucky part about that is that I was taken to the New York Foundling Hospital. And when you find a child that's thrown in a trash can, there's no identification. They estimated that I was 6 months, and it was July 11th, so they gave me an assigned birthday of January 11th. Maybe this is the lucky part or not so lucky part. But I get my name, Irene Monroe, because back in the day, the Catholic Church ran all the public orphanages. And Sister Irene was the head nun of the New York Foundling Hospital, who happened to be a Marilyn Monroe fan. That's either the lucky part or the not so lucky part. So I became a ward of New York City. And in essence, I grew up being nobody's daughter. But I share my origin story not to elicit sympathy, nor shock or awe, but to say to you that I am the living witness of acts of compassion that is essential to the bridge of human connection. Well, it's no doubt that I'm lucky. It's the work of strangers, as I say, seen and not seen, that puts me here today. And I'm reminded of this African proverb that it takes a village. So let me tell you my village. My village were ministers, teachers, counselors, social workers, strangers, who all helped me to be who I am today. And there's also some other things that were going on. The civil rights movement that throughout Plessy versus Ferguson, with Brown versus Board of Education, that allowed me to go to Wellesley College and then go to Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University, and then come up here to do my doctorate at Harvard. Compassion here, again, another sign of compassion out of a movement, allows me to be married to the woman I love. So I'm delighted tonight to talk with you all about compassion, and I want to share with you how I define compassion. Compassion literally means to suffer together. As both a minister and a theologian, I understand compassion to be both rooted in a praxis of action and also rooted in an ethic of social justice. Why? Because I see it as a sympathetic consciousness and a wokeness to others' distress. And when I mean others' distress, I mean emotionally, personally, and systemically, with a desire to alleviate it. And understanding compassion within the context of suffering together, it allows you to see the faces and hear the voices in society who are the damned, the disinherited, disrespected, and the dispossessed. Compassion is an understanding, the way I have been so fortunate and blessed to witness, is the interconnectedness between ourselves and others. And it allows us to see the other as ourself, as sacred. And when I say sacred, I mean that compassion allows you to see the sacred as yourself. It allows you to see the sacred in yourself, and it allows you to see the sacred in each other. And in so doing, you recognize the dignity in every person. So I'm here with you this evening because many in my past had the compassion to recognize my dignity as an abandoned baby thrown in a trash can. Thank you.
I'm really struck, Irene, by the conversations we've been having and the stories we've been telling, and what I'm struck by is the truth of that each of our lives is a story that tells itself in our living. And as we're using this evening as a way of locating ourselves in a story, in our stories, as a way of connecting out, I also have been thinking about what Maya Angelou said when she said that the greatest agony is the story that remains untold. Yeah. I thought about that as you were speaking, and I'm thinking about that as I'm about to share my story. And there were many parts of my story that I didn't know, because growing up, my father didn't share his story with us. And so I didn't know him, I didn't know myself, and I didn't know the world that we both inhabited. But at the same time, I carried his story within me without knowing it. And so there was an emotional pain, if you will, that I carried for him. And it was through the prism of that I looked at him and saw a helpless victim, which he didn't deserve. And it was through uncovering more of his story, consequently understanding my own and the world that we share, that completely transformed how I saw him, how I saw myself, and how I understood the world we were living in, and felt compelled to act from that place. Mm-hmm. But at that time, not knowing his story, growing up, an adult, I started to hear pieces of his story as an adult. And it awoke a hunger to know more about who he was so that I could better understand what lived inside of me. And so I was a professor at the time, and I got a grant, and I traveled to Europe on what I thought was an intellectual inquiry to understand the lessons of the Holocaust and the dangers of being silent in the face of others' oppression. And there I am with other educators doing this intellectual thing, and I find myself in the middle of Europe, realizing I am on a journey to find my father and to understand what I carried inside of me. I came back from that trip and tried to engage him in hearing about his life, and he wasn't really sharing very much. So I became an interviewer for Steven Spielberg's The Visual History of the Shoah Project, a project that utilized the funds that were made from the movie Schindler's List to collect and document all of the stories of remaining survivors who are still living, the goal being to create a repository that would stand in refute of revisionism, something that we really need in this moment, and also as an educational tool. And truly, I became an interviewer looking for my father's stories. And so I show up on the day of the interview at a survivor's home, and I meet the videographer. I'm there because I'm looking for my father, and the videographer is there because they are being paid well, and this is their job, and time is money, and we've got to get through the project. I come to the interview having already met the survivor 2 weeks earlier, gotten the outline of his or her story, so that I could then go do the research to understand, was there some part of the story that was going to be new to our historical record, but also to frame the kinds of questions that would help facilitate the telling of the story, because it was pre-war, during war, and post-war. 7:30 in the morning, we show up. We walk into the house, and my job for the first hour was to keep the survivor occupied while his or her home were being invaded by a crew that were taking apart the house, moving furniture, lighting, cameras, shutting off phones. And what I noticed, to my tremendous distress, was the way that the videographers interacted with this human being who I felt incredibly protective of and connected to. The survivor was just another object to be moved around the room, to be mic'd, and I witnessed the inhumanity of that interaction. The survivor was a job. 3, 4, 5 hours later, because there was never an interview that was less than 3 hours, because it's the telling of a life story, the cameras would get shut off, the lights would be turned down, and lo and behold, the videographers approached the survivor, the person, reverentially. Are you thirsty? Can I get you something to drink? Are you cold? Do you need a tissue? And I was blown away by the transformation that had happened. And I saw this time and again in the interviews. So I got curious, and I started to take the videographers out to lunch to find out what had happened in the course of a few hours. And what they spoke to is exactly what we're speaking about tonight. As they were standing behind the cool medium of the camera lens in a witness position, they were entering into the story, the life story of this person. And I heard things like, wow, when she spoke about her best friend as a child, I remembered my best friend. Or, I don't know how he dealt with the death of his grandmother. I was so close to my grandmother. And in that, what you saw happening was a bridge that was being built as the videographer saw him or herself in the story of the survivor, and compassion changed the interaction between the self of the videographer and the other of the survivor. But what happened for me is also profound, because what happened was, in hearing the survivor's story, I understood my father's story, and the person who had been the helpless victim became a courageous hero. And in becoming a courageous hero, something happened to me, and my role in the world shifted, and I felt compelled to act differently, and to seek out different kinds of experiences in the world. While all of that was happening, there was a spate of articles in the Boston Globe about the Cambodian youth gangs in Lowell, Massachusetts, second largest Cambodian refugee population in the country. And these teens who were joining gangs were the children of the survivors of Pol Pot's re-education concentration camps. And so there was also an identification on some level that I had, but in their alienation, they were seeking out violence. And I kept having this image pop into my head. If we could just get those kids behind cameras, hearing the stories of their parents, something might shift also. And maybe that kind of compassion and that could change that alienation. So I got a grant, and I met a man named Roberto Arevalo, who founded the Mirror Project. He was a street kid, and his life was changed when somebody gave him a camera. And in that camera, he started to document his life and literally began to see himself and connect to himself. And that woke up wanting to get other people's stories, and so he started to do that with other street kids. And I hired him as the person who was going to teach these alienated gang youth to work cameras and to be videographers. And I'll just share with you probably the story that touched me the most deeply is as one of these kids is standing behind the camera, and we never had them interview their parents. We always had them interview somebody of their parents' generation, but never their parents, and videotape them. This one kid whose father had been sent to one of the Pol Pot's camps as a victim of that, became a perpetrator in the camp in order to save his life. And the son hated him. And everybody in the community was ashamed because everybody in that community recognized him as a perpetrator of their parents' violence. And so standing behind the camera, what this kid recognized in the story of this adult who was speaking was what Primo Levi calls the choiceless choices of those who are living in totalitarian regimes, and recognized how different his father's choices were from his own choices growing up in the United States in Lowell, going to high school there. I will say that the outcome of that was the kind of transformation that led to a rapprochement with his family.
Yeah.
He got help from the Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association to get out of the gang, and he moved back home. And in all of that, the takeaway for me is the power and the need for us to deeply connect to our own stories, to understand them, to go after them, to listen to them, because that truly is the prerequisite for being able to build a bridge to find ourselves in the other. And what I have also found is once that happens, one must act.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one must act. It's not enough to feel compassion. It's the muscles that get built, the little steps, the little muscles that we have to figure out what those are so that we don't just feel compassion, but we actually act in ways that change the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, my story about compassion taught me at the age of 8, but also my church community, that the prescription for a healthy community is compassion, and that to have that beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about is that you always have to welcome in the stranger. So let me tell you this story here. I was 8 years old, and it's Sunday. And in Black church that I went to, every Sunday you had this moment called Children's Time in Worship. And in Children's Time of Worship, one of us were to stand in front of the congregation and tell what we learned in Sunday school that Sunday. And this particular Sunday, I was chosen. And the Sunday school lesson was from the book of Daniel, and it was about the 3 Hebrew boys who escaped a fiery furnace. So my pastor stands up and he says to me, he says, Irene, do you know the name of the 3 Hebrew boys? Well, the name of the 3 Hebrew boys are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I say, yes, Reverend Brown, I do know the name of the 3 Hebrew boys. They're Shadrach, Meshach, and a big Negro. Well, the church erupted, just like you did. And so my pastor corrects me, and he says, Irene, his name is Abednego. And I said, but he is the big Negro. And in Black church, you have call and response, and I heard some people say, just bless her little heart. Bless her little heart. She was listening, at least. And so the Reverend corrects me again. And I said, and he says, and I keep thinking, Abednego is the big Negro. And he says, well, tell me about the story. Because at this point, he wants to know, how do I understand this story? Well, I said, well, I know 3 Hebrew boys. I have to stand up. I know 3 Hebrew boys in this story. And people look at me, and you know, when you're 8-year-old, they understand that you kind of blur reality with fiction. So at this point, it's like, okay, we understand she's confused. But I said, no, I know 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace. So the Reverend says to me, he says, well, name one. And I say, Martin Luther King. And you know, everybody like, well, maybe that child knows something. Maybe she knows something. And so, and why he was in the fiery furnace for me is that summer, the August of 1963, hordes of Black churches, not just from Brooklyn, but all over the country, descended down on the Capitol for the March on Washington. And so in my church, every Sunday, we said a special prayer for Martin Luther King. So clearly he was in the fiery furnace. And I said in my 8-year-old voice is that King was in the fiery furnace because he is trying to make us free. And there's some other people who don't want to. That's how I understood it as an 8-year-old. And they just said, bless your heart, child, bless your heart, and a few little amens, amens. And then I said, and I know two others. And of course, now at this point, they really want to know what's in my mind. And I said, Fritz. And you could hear a pin drop in the congregation. So let me tell you about Fritz. Fritz wasn't liked in the neighborhood. He was called the devil, and some of us called him Tattoo Man. So let me tell you why he was called the devil. Fritz owned the laundromat in our neighborhood. And every Saturday, he closed the laundromat and opened it up on Sunday. And so we were like, nothing but the devil in this man, okay? Because he knows we got to wash clothes. And more importantly, we need some clean clothes for Sunday. Well, the church was really complex. It was like confused, and it was like, this is really complex, so where is she going? And I said, Fritz escaped the fiery furnace. So let me tell you how I understood that Fritz escaped the fiery furnace. One day, well, I shouldn't say one day, but one cold Sunday, I spent my Sunday school money on candy. And so I couldn't go to church because I had no money to give in the offering plate. So I figured that I would hang out in Fritz's laundromat because it is a December Sunday, and everybody would know when I didn't put any money in the offering plate that I had spent it. Plus, I was the type of kid that you would eat candy, and you say, Irene, did you eat candy? And you see it all on my face. And I said, no, I didn't eat it. So any event, I go into Fritz's laundromat, and I tell him what happened, what I did, and he kind of understood, like, oh, yeah, you are in a dilemma. And I said to him, and I'm feeling really, nervous, but then he comes out with some cookies and milk, so I really warm up to Fritz. And as an 8-year-old, I'm unfiltered, and I say to him, I said, well, the neighborhood calls you the devil. And he goes, yeah. And then just being unfiltered, I go and say, well, I want to tell you about my favorite numbers. My favorite numbers are 3 because I'm in the 3rd grade, 8 because I'm 8, and I said, now you tell me about your numbers. And he tells me that he was a survivor of the Holocaust. And he meets me at the age that he lost his daughter, and he lost his wife. And so in church, I say, Fritz escaped the fiery furnace. And a lot of people in my church didn't know about the Holocaust. But I didn't know how to pronounce Holocaust. I call it Holocaust. That he was in this Holocaust and he escaped it. But close enough. But what changed, though, for a church and a community that didn't like Fritz? Because what happens is that as blacks moved into certain urban communities, and it used to be a Jewish community, and Fritz stayed in the community because he lived on top of his business, which was the laundromat. But what changed for all of us was that as a church that was struggling with racism, it shamed us in terms of not welcoming the stranger and hearing his story. But things changed that day when I told this story about the Holocaust and Fritz and our favorite numbers. Because where the laundromat was closed on Saturdays, when I became of a certain age, I ran that laundromat. And then what happened is that Fritz poured the best in me because he taught me German, and that's a real, not only hard language, but you could imagine this black urban kid speaking fluent German and singing Hebrew songs. And I'm trying to teach him how to say Jesus the way that we say it in black church. But the long and short of this story is that when you see the stranger in yourself, and when you see that his suffering as a Holocaust survivor mirrors the kind of struggle that we're having in the 1960s, you begin to see yourself in Fritz, and Fritz began to see himself in us. and we all became a much healthier community. Thank you.
So we share some of our stories with you as a segue now for you to have a bit of that opportunity. We really want this to be participatory. We really want this to be something that becomes an experience for all of us. And I want to just share with you something else that Maya Angelou said. She said that there's no greater shelter and companionship. Stories are the thing we need most in the world. And right now, we need each other's stories most in the world as a way to connect beyond the divide that we're living in. It makes me want to share a story that I've shared this week, and I'm going to share it again. I just had a really challenging experience around compassion that really tested me. I had a minor surgical procedure recently, and I was sitting in the doctor's office waiting for the doctor to come in, watching the Kavanaugh hearings on my phone and screaming at my phone in the doctor's office and being really upset. And the doctor walks in and said, "Hey, Barbara, how you doing?" And I said, "Oh my God, I'm, watching this craziness." And she said, and this is a doctor who I have a relationship with and know, and she said, "I know, my God, it's really awful. We have to worry about our sons. They're guilty until proven innocent." And I'm telling you, I just sort of didn't know what to do and felt frozen inside. And here I am worrying about my daughters, my granddaughters, and she's worried about her sons. And in that moment, like my voice is in my head, well, I've got to tell her, I've got to straighten her out, I've got to tell her what's right, very self-righteous voices. I felt fear. I mean, she's going to do a surgical procedure. And I have a relationship with her, and I felt real sadness about the potential loss of connection with her. And it felt like an hour went by. But what happened was I started to feel the sadness of, oh my God, there's such a divide here between me and this other woman. And what came out of my mouth from that place was, "I just need you to know, in all honesty, I think we're on opposite sides of this divide." And she sort of looked at me. I don't know what she thought in that moment. And I said, from the place of like really feeling the sadness, what came out was, "But I hope that there's some place that we could connect around both being mothers worrying about our children." And there's the activist in me that says, well, that's a kind of weak response, right? But if there's any hope that she and I can get to a meaningful dialogue where my self-righteous voices actually can straighten her out, there has to be a foundation of that kind of connection. And I have to say, when I said that to her, I actually felt the sadness of two women mothers who were that separated by what's happening in the world right now. And the only hope we have is to be able to locate inside of ourselves that which is real that can help to bridge that divide. Because otherwise, we're going to kill each other. So I offer that and I really use the practice, my practice of pausing and breathing and going inside and like, what's there, for me to connect with. And it's hard. It's hard work right now. I mean, this is where we're really tested in compassion. It's not just the idea of it. It's how do we really make space for multiple realities when some of them feel really dangerous. Yeah.